So I'm recording. And the first question was, where did your faith journey start?
So my father is Church of Wales and my mother is Baptist, but I was born in Wales, and we lived in our family home of Brecon. Most people know the Brecon Beacons. It's been on the news quite a lot these days for walkers and things. A beautiful part of the country, but it's still just a market town, very much like Tetbury, but a Welsh one. And church is very central to life there. My family has been going to St David's in Landbase and Brecon for just over 400 years. And I think, so I started off in Sunday school as normal, learning all the little Bible stories, but it wasn't just that. A big part of every time you went past a church was going in and going and talking to relatives who have passed, because we have hundreds of years of gravestones that were cared for by all different members of the family. I think it's such an important thing. When we do go home to Brecon, I take the boys and we go and we meet my great-grandparents, their great-great-grandparents, and we have a little chat about them. And William finds it fascinating that obviously he's named after, I think, up to 5 times great-grandfather. Yeah, and that they can see that history is there. And in the meantime, the church is in the background. It's lovely that even though we no longer live in Wales, that the vicar will still greet everybody by name, because it's that sense of community that I have grown up in and remember since the age of 4. When I was 5.5, we moved to South Africa, which was very difficult. I remember it being very strange to me that we were going somewhere so different to what I was used to. And it was difficult for my parents as well, because obviously at the time South Africa was in apartheid. And they wanted to try and protect me from that as much as possible. And the only schools that would allow multiracial classes were religious schools. So hence I went to one. So my preschool was a Baptist preschool. And then when I went to primary school, I went to what they call an English faith school. So that is basically a British school. And yes, we were in uniform, and every morning we had assembly and we sung hymns and we prayed. And it was just the norm. And faith in Africa is so important. For some people, it's all they have. So growing up as a child in school, in primary school, that it was just normal. And we went to church clubs and church camps during the summer. And so it was a very faith-based growing up. But a lot of that was to try and protect me from everything else that was going on in the country. I wasn't actually aware of anything at all. I didn't realize apartheid existed until I was about 14 or 15. So my parents did sort of do a very good job of maybe too much so. Yeah, and so hymns and a religious ceremony became quite important to me. So I would call myself a bit of a traditionalist, but that is just because that's how I have been brought up. The one thing about a religious school in South Africa is that the sermons can be quite, what's the word? Intense sometimes. I do remember I was about 12 or 11. Yes, I was 11, and I remember our headmaster giving us a sermon about how the children turn black with sin. And this is something that we must be aware of in South Africa. And I went home because it upset me. and I wasn't too sure why, because it was quite obvious what he was referring to. And I had grown up with my nanny Ruth, who was devout Catholic and went to church every Sunday. I went home and actually chatted to her about it rather than my parents first. And she did her best to try and explain to me about how things were different between us. And she used an analogy of a bus journey. My mother didn't drive at the time, so she explained to me, when you go to the shops with your mum, you go on one bus, and when you go to the shops with me, we go on a different bus. And I was like, oh yes, I do know that, but that's because the bus stops are separate. In my mind, that was the reason why. And she said, no, it's because we can't ever mix in things like that. And so you are allowed as a child to go on both buses, but I'm not allowed to go on the bus that you usually go on. And I was like, oh, is that why I've never been to your house? Because you're always at our house. And she said yes. And I asked if I could go. And bizarrely enough, my parents were very, very worried about this whole idea I'd come up with, but they did agree to it. And the idea was that I would go on a Sunday because it would be church. And that was, bizarrely enough, the safest time to do things that were illegal, because everyone was in church on a Sunday. So you had less police presence. And that was the first time I went to, it was a mining township, where I was absolutely shocked. It was the first time I saw how differently people could live, and you could be completely blind to that. We went to Ruth's sister's house, Pauline, and she had 3 children. They lived in a two-roomed house. So one room was the kitchen dining room, and the other was the bedroom lounge, and they all lived in that. And we went to church, and it was totally different hymns, and they weren't sung in English either. They were sung in Xhosa. Luckily, I knew enough Xhosa to get along. So yeah, it was very interesting, but it was very lively and totally different to what I was used to. After that service, I needed the bathroom, and was quite shocked that the church didn't have one. And neither did Pauline's house. And you had to walk about 1 kilometre up to the top of the road, where the designated 5 toilets for the entire street were. And they were very nice, and I was given a roll of toilet paper, and I was allowed to go to the front of the queue. And again, it never occurred to me that this was odd, other than being allowed to go to the front of the queue, other than the whole situation was completely bizarre. And my mother got very upset when I got home that day, because I had so many questions, because we were being taught the same things, but from totally different points of view. And it was because of this that the next year I decided I didn't want to go to the high school I should have gone to, which was a Christian high school. And I actually decided that it would be better to learn about other faiths. And therefore I opted to go to a Jewish high school in South Africa, which was very different. But I thoroughly enjoyed it. I only went there for 2 years because we moved to a different part of South Africa, to the Eastern Cape. But it opened my eyes, because it was still a South African school and apartheid was still around. So it was, you didn't have assembly every day. We only had it on a Friday. And as you know, Pentecost that we're going through now is originally a Jewish ceremony. And yeah, learning how actually our 2 faiths originated from exactly the same place was quite eye-opening to me, because in my junior Christian faith learning, that had never ever been explored. We were only taught about Christianity and how it was the only right way. So when I went to a Jewish high school, was the first revelation I had that we actually the three main religions, Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, all originate together, and that we all have the same God. It's just when Jesus Christ came along, well, before that it was the two brothers, but where Judaism and Islam split, and then we split off from Judaism. And I found that interesting, that why is there all this conflict and hatred and confusion between the three of us when we have so much in common? So yes, that was quite interesting to me. And yeah, it was a very strange and bumpy journey I took. But throughout that, I had this cornerstone, which was every year I would return to the United Kingdom, to Wales, to my family village and my family church, where everything was exactly the same as it has been for living memory. And that gave me a lot of comfort. It really did. So yes, my early faith journey was quite interesting, I think, to me anyway, when I sat here and thought about it.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely extraordinary. Thank you, thank you. So the second bit is reflecting back. Has there been a time when the path has felt hard? And has there been anything which has particularly sustained you in that time, kept you going?
Yes, I think for us, our hardest time was, for myself and Paula, was after we got married, and we'd been married for about 2 years, and we decided we wanted to start a family. And for some odd reason, you just think this will happen overnight, and it didn't for us at all. It was very difficult, and back and forth to doctors for tests, and it's a very invasive and clinical interpretation of what's going on in your life, while no one actually deals with the emotional hardships and things that are going on between you as a couple and your desire to be a family. Before we even got married, we had discussed adoption, because it was something I always wanted to do, and specifically I wanted to adopt a South African child, because I was aware that currently 10% of a 40 million population of children in South Africa are homeless. They don't have a family. They live in children's homes, and some of the teenagers even live in prisons. It's not a great situation, and it's unfathomable to imagine 4 million children who, go home every night and don't get a hug before they go to sleep. So it was something that I was acutely aware of, and having a family where adoption is normal in our family, it's happened many times before, and in Paula's as well. It was something we knew we wanted to do. But we'd always sort of had this family plan where we were going to have our own children first and then adopt after. I don't know why this seemed like the norm to us, but we weren't getting anywhere in the UK, and we prayed on it, and we actually decided, you know what, let's go to South Africa, where the fertility treatments, etc., are not more advanced, but private care is far more accessible and affordable in British terms. And so we moved over, and we went to see a specialist who, bizarrely enough, in the middle of a power cut, found out the problem by just an external exam of Paula, which was even more infuriating after 2 years of back and forth to the doctors in the UK, to go and visit a doctor who in the dark manages to figure out that yes, there is a problem, and had Paula in hospital that evening, and she had a minor surgery. And that was apparently going to sort everything out. But it was at this point that we really did rely on our faith. And after praying and thinking and talking, we came to the conclusion that when had we decided that the norm was to have your own child before you adopted, and adoption can take a considerable amount of time, So we thought, well, do you know what? Let's just start the process because we're going to do it anyway, so we may as well get things started. It doesn't matter who comes first or what comes first. And we went to the adoption agency in South Africa, and things went ridiculously quickly, very, very quickly. And it was on our return back from Port Elizabeth for a fertility appointment that we got a message that we had been matched with a child. And I remember we were in an absolute flummox because we couldn't get a signal to download the photograph, and we were in the middle of nowhere in a petrol station trying to get this photograph to download. And just from a simple picture, we fell in love with our first boy, Nathan, just from his first picture. And we got to meet him 2 days later. And 2 weeks after that, he stayed overnight for the first time. And then he was placed with us as a position of safety until his adoption was completed. When we completed his adoption, we decided we were going to call him because he was our gift from God.
Oh, beautiful.
Which is the meaning of the word Nathan. And we just, he changed our lives. A lot of people say, oh, he is so lucky. We were definitely the lucky ones. And it wasn't long after Nathan came along that we got the news that William would be following shortly.
Brilliant. Thank you. Thank you. And so that sense in that description of you and Paul are walking with God through that time,
Mm-hmm.
praying and holding it in God's care. So the last question really, is there something, and maybe bringing it to the time now when things are tough in lots of ways, something that's really been a joy or a blessing for you in your faith?
I think what a realization to me recently has been, I have always, and so has Paula, we have always been, everything happens for a reason. And it's only with this lockdown that we've realized that, well, what we're really saying is that God has a plan. And we trust in that. And we always have. But maybe we haven't assigned it to him, even though we have been relying on him all the time. I think I have been asking myself how people who don't have any belief system can get actually through situations like this. It must be incredibly hard, especially if they are young and living alone. I suppose they disappear into PlayStation games and videos, but if you're anything like me, you must have absolutely burning questions as to why. I think it's one of my two biggest faults and strengths is I ask why a lot, and I have this unwavering faith in fairness. I don't know how I could do that without my faith. And I think it's just something that you have there. And I think what I was amazed about was how when we went to this digital platform of the church, how suddenly what I keep calling closet Christians just suddenly appeared. Because they've always been there. I think it's just I have experienced it. I'm a very open Christian. I don't not talk about my faith, and what I love about that is as soon as you are open about it, people approach you with questions because they have so many. First of all, they look for that third eye or the third arm that's going to sprout out of you, because there's this amazing person telling you that they believe in something that science says can't possibly be true. And they're intrigued as to why you believe. Where does this faith come from? What does it do for you? How does it work? And especially church, they're definitely intrigued about church. If you're my generation, I think if you've watched Steel Magnolias, there is an absolutely amazing scene in that at a funeral where she invites someone to church, and they were like, oh, I don't think I would go because they may get me to kill a chicken. And she says, no, not on your first visit. And I always take that as an inspiration to have a bit of fun with some of the questions they ask, because some of them are really bizarre as to what people think goes on in the church, where we're just sharing hymns and having a community and sharing our faith and peace. It's, I think, yes, I think it has become more important to me now about spreading the word. Pentecost is about how we protect our faith for the second coming. And it suddenly dawned on me this 2020, 43 years it's taken, but how important it is to actually share your faith rather than just answer questions. Sometimes you actually need to get out there and talk a bit more about it, rather than just be openly Christian. Sometimes it's more about inviting people in, which is something I've never done because I've always seen that as being a bit pushy. But a simple invitation and taking no offense when they say no seems to be far more effective. And I think that's something that has dawned on me recently. And even talking to Paula, we jokingly were talking the other day about, oh, she said, you're talking like you should take the cloth yourself. And I was like, you know, it's, I've never thought of it that way, but I honestly do feel like Christ and God have been with us through our entire journey and have looked after us so well. We have so many blessings, and we can sometimes get caught up in the materialism of life, and just looking around how lucky we actually are and the things we've seen and experienced. And as I said, you know, in Africa, some people just have their faith. That's all they have. And it's enough to get them through. But those of us who are luckier, do we really do enough to help others in our faith, which is part of our journey of protecting our faith until the second coming? So it is, it's a big question that your email got going, the cogs turning in my head. And yes, we've been having those wonderfully in-depth discussions.
Thank you. Thank you. Wow, that is absolutely amazing. I'm just going to